Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought we would do a quick little, hopefully it will be fairly quick, recent deck mod roundup. So I tend to keep a list of decks that I want to mod. They're here in my planner. I also have a list of bags I need to make and I am definitely behind on that whole process because I have a bunch of decks I need to make bags for and I just haven't taken the time to do it. So I thought we would go over my list just really quickly of decks that I am planning on doing a mod of and decks that I have modded. So maybe we'll start with the decks that I have recently modded. Okay, so the first deck I wanted to share with you that I modded is actually my Poe Tarot. So this is a mass market tarot deck and I think it was gilded because, like, I'll be honest, I actually modded this a while ago. So these are mods that I've done over the last couple of months. So I think this was the first one that I started with in this recent roundup of deck mods. This, I really am just not a fan of gilded decks and I'm pretty sure this had gilding on it. I did actually take some video, so I'll clip that in as I'm talking about the process here. When I'm trying to de-gild a deck, I just throw it into my trimmer and I cut the gilding off. So I'm just cutting a little slice of the deck off, not a ton. It doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the size, but if a deck is just a tad too large like this one is, then actually de-gilding it helps with the size. This one was great to de-gild because it was lots of white space around it. I definitely had to take some time to kind of make sure that I wasn't cutting into any of the text or anything or any of the imagery. But for the most part, all of these cards had a lot of white space around them and it was pretty easy to de-gild them. So if you are new to deck mods, it's definitely not a new thing. It was more, I think, of a popular practice a few years ago. It is something that I still do most of the time for like actual being able to work with a deck. So most of the time that I'm modding a deck nowadays, it's actually to make it more physically comfortable for me. Whether that is taking off sharp edge gilding that I don't like, or it is actually trying to make the deck smaller because it's too big for my hands. Those tend to be where my mods sit most of the time these days. I do still like to edge my decks, which is purely for aesthetics, and that's definitely something I still enjoy, but I don't do mods near as often as I used to. And most of the time nowadays when I'm doing a mod, it is because I'm trying to make some sort of physical change to the deck. Most of the time it is remove gilding. That tends to be the time that I end up modding the most. It's also the most time consuming, so it tends to get put off quite a while. I've had the Poe Tarot, I think, for like well over a year now, and I really love this deck, but like physically I didn't like working with it because of the gilding. It like cut into my hands. Like apparently I'm just real super sensitive when it comes to gilding. It's gotta be matte, it's gotta be soft, and it cannot catch on my fingers because the minute it catches on my fingers, I'm out. If I don't cut the gilding off, if I don't de-gild the deck, I just won't use it. So a lot of the times when I'm doing a mod like this, where I'm just taking off that sharp edge gilding, it's actually to make the deck more comfortable for me to work with. A lot of times I will also, like if I have some extra space around it and a deck is too big, I can cut it down to size a little bit, and so it makes it a little bit easier for me to work with. So that was my de-gilding the Poe Tarot. I did de-gild another deck, but I want to talk real quick about a couple of decks that I just edged. Two of these I showed very recently in my monthly wrap-up, so I'll just mention them real quickly here. This is the Lilith's Oracle, and this one I just edged in black. I use black Tombow. I just sit here while I watch TV or TerraTube or Critical Role or whatever, and I just color the edges of my deck. Again, I have full tutorials on how I do this. I really like this one being black with the red backs because I use this primarily with my Tarot Vampires, and that one is edged in red, and so they kind of are complementary to each other. Another deck that I sat and edged is my B Tarot. I'm kind of having a little bit of a love affair with this deck right now, and I edged it in this yellow color. Again, Tombow yellow. If I can find the marker that I used, I will leave in the description box below every color that I used with every deck, if I can find it. This is a great little deck. I really love this one. And this was really just an aesthetic thing. I just wanted, you know, the whole yellow sunshiny bee vibe all the way around. It just really finishes the deck off nicely. And that's really all it is. This is totally an aesthetic thing. I didn't make any other changes to this deck, just edged it for fun. Another deck that I finally edged, which feels like took me forever because this is like one of my most used decks. It's also a favorite in my collection. This is the Diablo Tarot, and I finally edged it in red. Here was the deal with this deck. Red is a very hard color to work with. It has a tendency to bleed. Like whether you're using, I'm like, is it bleeding? I can't tell. Is it bleeding? I can't tell. I've edged a lot of my decks in red Tombow, and it does like bleed and transfer off onto your hand quite a bit. So this time I decided to try a red in a stamp. I used an Archival ink red stamp to try and get a nice red color that hopefully is not gonna come off on my hands. So now again, it just really finishes the deck off, right? Like, and this is a single coat. I just did a single coat. It's still kind of stinky though. So the stamp pads are stinky, and like it is still smelling a little bit. That will wear over time, but like look how beautiful it is, edged in red. Yeah, so far the stamps, like I'm just checking, is it coming off on my hands? It doesn't appear to be. It doesn't appear to be. I like did some testing, like rub my hand across it, and it's definitely not transferring. I do feel like there's a little bit of tackiness to the edging, and I'm not sure if that's just because it's a different type of ink that I'm not used to. It is definitely dry. Like I did this a couple weeks ago, so it's definitely dry, and I've used it since, and it's not, you know, not coming off on my hand or anything. But I feel like the red stamp might be the way to go with a red color because it's not transferring on my hands. And like, I don't mind like transfer, like I can go wash my hands, that's cool. I don't mind transfer on my hands. I just try to be really mindful when it's something that's very like dark or very noticeable, because then if I touch other things like other decks or my planer or things like that, then I'm transferring that ink across all those things. So I do try to be mindful of that, but like I really don't mind if it bleeds on my hand a little bit because eventually it all stops. It seems like the stamp pad is gonna work pretty well in terms of doing these darker colors. Also, I love that this is one coat, and I got this really nice saturation on it. I think it looks really, really good. So I'm really happy to finally have my Diablo Tarot edged. Again, totally an aesthetic thing. Did it need it? No, but it like really adds to the whole vibe of the deck, right? Okay, so the last deck that I want to share with you that I actually have modded is the Witch's Familiar, and I'm gonna talk about the other decks in this collection in my deck mod plans for the future. So I really like these decks. I think I've talked about them quite a few times on my channel now. I ended up de-gilding this one, and like I love it so much more. It's that kind of like cheap, not great, shiny silver gilding, which like, why? If it doesn't add anything, like it didn't even match. It didn't even match. It would have matched more if it was gold. So this is my thing with gilding. Why are you gilding a deck and not making it match? You're just gilding it to gild it, and it's cheap, crappy gilding. So like, just don't bother. Just don't bother. That's my hot take on it. It's not really a hot take. I have expressed that frustration and opinion many times on my channel. Anyway, I de-gilded this one, and this one was a little bit more of a challenge because some of the words are very, very close to the bottom. And I did end up having to, you know, take off a little bit of the artwork. I feel like there's a couple, like, yeah, in Ferocity where it got like super, like the Y is on the cut. It's fine, I don't mind that. I can still read it, and to me, this is better than having that ridiculously cheap, sharp gilding that is gonna, you know, hurt my hands every time I work with it. Again, I used my, you know, measurement method to ensure that the deck was as straight cut as possible, as evenly cut as possible. And now actually it shuffles even better. It's a tiny bit smaller so I can get my hands around it even better. And I've edged it in this great like green color. I tend to like to pick accent colors up on my edging rather than like just, yellow would have been a good choice for sure. But I ended up picking a color that is kind of this teal blue green here. And that's kind of the color I went with. It's a little bit more green. It looks very green on camera, but in person it's a little bit more in the green blue side of things. And I just like that. Also, it like matched some of the little flower details on the borders. And I am in love with the way that this turned out. The deck is like, it feels soft and like really nice in my hand. This is a single coat of Tombow, but anyway, this was a great mod. I had a lot of fun doing this one. And let's move into talking about decks I'm gonna be modding, because I now have this whole series of decks. Totally Krista made me do it. But I started with this one. This was the first of these decks that I had, this Kitchen Witch's Oracle. I really love these decks. I've talked about it quite a bit, like with my members and stuff, but like, see, why? It doesn't even match. This is my frustration. Like, why did you not at least choose gold? Because there's at least yellow on the back of the card. It drives my designer brain crazy. It's a very me thing, but also like it is legit catching on my hands. Because when you gild them, they get a lip on them a lot of the times. And when I shuffle, that lip catches on my fingers and I don't like it. Also, this is a bigger stretch to get my hands around it, which makes it difficult for me to work with. So if you compare this to this, here's the size difference. Is that gonna show up on camera? Probably not. But you can see, like, I took quite a bit off, and like this one's gonna be interesting to trim. So I ended up taking quite a bit off, I think, the tops, as I was trying to make it smaller. So I do believe with this particular deck, I took more off the top than I did off the bottom. And now you can see, maybe this side might be better. Yeah, this might be a little bit better. Sorry, these are very glossy, so they are gonna reflect. But you can see I took just like, what is that, 1/4 of an inch off. It ended up being between the two sides. Remember, I cut two sides. So between the two sides, like 1/4 of an inch and about a 1/2 inch total between top and bottom. So there's a nice size difference, and this is so much easier for me to shuffle. So I started with this one with the trimming, because here's the thing, I'm going to trim all of these decks down, removing all the gilding, and then what I'm hoping to do is to trim them all down to this size. So I'm going to use this size, this deck, as my reference, and I'm going to trim my Kitchen Witch's Oracle, my Witch's Moon Magic. So this is another one. Let's just take a look here. Again, gilding. I mean, at least this one, the silver, it matches. I feel like has a little bit nicer gilding. I feel like this is a newer deck, but it has a little bit nicer gilding. So I think that I'm gonna be able to trim this one down. Yeah, I mean, I have to do some, you know, finagling to make sure that I keep the border center and things like that. But this one should be able to trim really nicely down to this size. So that's the Witch's Moon, and then I also have the Witch's Wisdom. There is another one of these decks that is coming out, I think, later this year, which is definitely sitting in my list, and I will be getting, because I want to use all of these, and I want to do like there's a thing I want to do with them, particular reading. But again, here, gilding. Again, at least it matches. I think this one is going to be fine to mod. I mean, I might end up cutting a little bit into the symbols on the top and the sides, but like, that's fine with me. So yeah, it's gonna make, you know, it's gonna make quite the difference, I think, when I'm done. And then they will all be the same size. If everything goes to plan, these 4 decks will all be the same size, which means that I can also not only use them individually, but I will be able to actually mix them all together. All right, let's talk about 2 other decks that I'm like kind of on the fence with modding. So if you have thoughts, opinions, feel free to share them with me in the comments below. I would love to know what you all think. Would you mod these decks? What would you do with them? So let's talk first about the dirt gems. And I feel like I have had this whole discussion. It might have been in membership, but if it was, you know, publicly with all of you, and I'm repeating myself, I apologize. Let's just talk real quick about the dirt gems. So here's the thing with this deck, and like, I know I'm repeating myself. I know I am, as I know I've talked about it with members. I just don't know if I've talked about it anywhere else. What's the deal? Oh yeah, I have them divided up. So, okay, here's the thing with this particular deck. There is like 2 different kind of suity things going on. With this deck, we have the black and white cards, and then we have the cards that have color. I feel like every time I get one of these, it throws me out of the reading, and I just don't enjoy including them in the deck. So I've pulled them out to use them as their kind of like their own oracle. And then I've got these cards separated out because I really like the art. I really like the aesthetics of it. But here's the thing with a deck like this, and I've talked about this many times, it just has the plant, and that makes me completely reliant on the guidebook, which I don't want to be. And I just don't know enough about plants to work with that energy without being reliant on the guidebook. So my initial thought was I'm gonna stamp on these. I think, or write. No, I was just gonna write on them because that's the thing. I can't stamp on these because they're black. Bought a white paint pen and I just wanna write a keyword like somewhere on these cards. Some of them might be might be a little bit difficult to find space to write a keyword, but I think that would work really well, just to be able to just, you know, like some of them have got lots of space. It's like, this is gilding that's done fine. This is nice, it's matte. I mean, does it really match the deck? No, but like pink would have been good. I mean, I guess they're sort of a yellowy gold. I feel like pink would have been good. Purple, blue, there's yellow. This is me being really, really nitpicky now. But this is gilding I don't mind. It's matte, it's soft, it doesn't catch, it doesn't impede on a shuffle at all, and that's the kind of gilding I enjoy. My thought is maybe to get into the guidebook, which is a lovely little book. And there are, okay, so here is where I like pulled this deck all out and I had my white paint pen and I was like ready to go with it. And then I stumbled over, what do I actually want to write on these cards? Because each of these cards also has like a title, and I don't know why these aren't just on the cards. Like that would fix, for the most part, that would fix a lot of my issue with it. Although the honey dripper, that really like doesn't mean a lot to me, but like the ancestor is cool, the swarm wrangler, the radiant renewer. I mean, I feel like even that would be something that I could work with. The moving river. But I feel like looking at this artwork, I would be like, how is that the moving river? Like why? Why is there a flower? Why is there the roots that look like lungs? And then we have the moving river, and like, I feel like I need more than that. So here's my struggle. If I write a single keyword, is it going to be enough? Is my first question. Because there's lots of beautiful words that I could choose out of the guidebook to write on the card. I could write the title, but I don't know if that is going to actually, I don't know why I'm flipping backwards. I don't know if that is going to give me enough to work with, because like here, St. John's wort, the ladder and the stairway, just taking that and just looking at this card image, that, I got nothing. I got nothing. Is it just me? I got nothing. This kind of looks like a ladder, and it kind of maybe makes a ladder stairway thing. And I'm a little bit confused as to what I would write on the card that would make it so I wouldn't have to be reliant on the guidebook. I have absolutely nothing against getting into a guidebook. I really enjoy guidebooks. I just don't want to like have to. I don't want to be relying on it, because not every reading do I have time to actually get into the guidebook. But maybe this is just one of those decks that I am not going to be able to use without a guidebook, because it's just going to require me to do that extra legwork, right? So that's always the question. And I guess that's kind of a little bit what maybe some food for thought for myself or anybody else who's interested in these little deck mod roundups, where I talk about, you know, the decks, the mods that I'm planning, is should I mod it? Do I need to mod it? Like, will it actually make the deck more usable for me? And I just don't know what to put on this deck that would actually make it more usable, or to make it where I wasn't so completely reliant on the guidebook. Again, I don't mind getting into the guidebook, but here's the thing. If I pull one of these into a reading with tarot, which is how I use it, and I get holy basil, I really don't know what that means. So I'm completely relying on the artwork and my intuition, which I can totally do. And this deck works really well for that. And that's kind of my other go-to, is like, okay, if I'm gonna use it strictly intuitively and I'm not gonna worry about what the plant is or what it means or anything, and I'm just gonna work off the artwork, then I kind of wanna just cut the titles off, because I don't need them. But again, it's a lovely matte gilding, so then I'm like, if I cut this off, I have to cut the rest of the gilding off, otherwise it's gonna look really weird, and you know, like aesthetically that's not great. So anyway, I'm on hold with this deck mod, because now I'm at the point where like, I don't know if I actually wanna mod it. And also, I'll be honest, I'm kind of at the point where I actually don't know if I wanna keep it, because this deck feels like it requires more work than I think I actually want to give to it. And I know that sounds terrible, but my tarot time is kind of limited, and I have like a lot of decks, and decks that really make me work that hard for it just to use it don't tend to get used in my collection unless I'm doing like a specific study or thing with it, right? Like if it's a particular practice or a particular study that I'm in, then I'm willing to put that time and effort into it. But just for just an oracle that just should be a support to a tarot reading that I'm doing, which is primarily how I use my oracles, I feel like this deck is going to require too much work, too much effort from me to use it in a reading. I really like the artwork though, and so that's where I'm at. Maybe it just needs to be an intuitive deck and I just need to leave it at that, or I could write key. Like there's so many things I could do. I'm in paralysis with this deck because I don't know which direction to take it, because I don't know how I want to work with it. And until I figure that out, I'm not going to touch it. And that's where we're at. Kind of in the same vein, which is really interesting. So I bought this deck. I had a whole thought. I had a whole plan for this deck because I was like, it goes really well with Notoria. That is the boyfriend deck. And my original plan with this was to basically cut everything off, take it down to the artwork, and then stamp my own thing over the top of it to use with the Notoria. While I like the artwork, most of it, the titles mean absolutely nothing to me. And this is a case where, again, I'm very reliant on the guidebook to the point where it inhibits my work with the deck. It's also a quite lengthy guidebook. So I started actually, you can see here, this is where I'm at. I started going through and highlighting some of the things that stood out to me. So where I'm at with this deck mod process, well, where I started was I was going to stamp my own things on it. And then I started reading the guidebook and I was like, actually, there's some really cool things in the guidebook. I like it, but the titles do nothing for me. Like I'm probably not the target audience for this deck, and that's totally fine, but I like the artwork. I like the aesthetics of it, and I am enjoying the guidebook. So I'm actually reading through every single entry and just highlighting a phrase or a keyword or something that stands out to me. So like on this particular card, card 10, I highlighted androgynous spiritual essence. The thing is, does that mean anything to me? So here I'm back to I did this. I mean, the inner path of awakening, that makes sense to me. But again, that could apply to any of these cards. So the more I read it, the more I felt like, and it's kind of why I stopped, I felt like they kind of all felt like they were sort of meaning the same thing. And like, I get it, it's all facets of this particular energy, but it was just not clicking with me of how these were individual sort of representations, like in and of themselves, right? To where each card actually represented something that I felt like I could do something with it in my reading and in my practice. So then I was back to, okay, well, maybe I just need to like stamp my own thing on it. And now we're circling back to, okay, is it worth the effort? Is it worth the effort to actually take the time to trim everything off this deck, to figure out new keywords or things that I want to stamp on it, and then to actually take the time to stamp on it or even write on it? Like stamping on it takes forever, but I could write on the cards. And while the art is beautiful, I'm back to, I just don't know if it's worth the effort. And sometimes this happens with deck mods, which is why for the most part nowadays, when I think I'm gonna mod a deck, I write it in my little list and then I wait. I don't mod it right then and there, particularly if it's like a trimming or a retitling or a resequencing of the deck. If it's just coloring the edges, that's fine. I grab a marker and I sit and color whenever I'm watching TV or whatever. But when it comes to something like this, where I'm thinking about significantly changing the deck, I have to stop and ask myself, is it worth the time and effort to do that? Do I like the art well enough for me to put that kind of energy into the deck? And does the art itself speak to me enough to be able to do that? And where I've kind of landed with this deck is it doesn't feel like to me that there is enough within the artwork that sets it apart individually. As in, I feel like I could pull a card and I could pick a keyword for this deck and I could pull a card and every card could mean that. Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean that, I'm not trying to sound like, you know, like I'm crapping all over the deck or anything. I'm just kind of trying to verbalize my thought process before I actually mod a deck. For those people who are interested in deck modding, obviously if you're not interested in deck modding, you're probably not watching this video. But that's kind of where I'm at. Like, it feels all the same, and especially as I started reading through the guidebook, which I do quite like, but as I was highlighting things, that's where I started to really realize that these all feel very similar to me, and I don't need a whole deck of these. And I have other decks that have like a card or two that kind of encompass this energy, and so I feel like I would be better served to just pull out those decks and either work with those individual cards or just use that energy when it comes up naturally in that reading. So I feel like this is one of those cases where I'm like, I had a thought, like it would be cool to do this deck mod, this kind of creative project with it. And then I realized, like, kind of after sitting with it, looking at it, reading the guidebooks, and kind of working through the process of setting up for the mod with this, I kind of realized that it really wouldn't serve any purpose. It wouldn't change the deck enough to make it worth the effort that would have to put into it. It wouldn't make it so significantly different than other things that I have in my collection that, again, it would be worth the time and effort. So I just thought, like, for this deck mod roundup, we talk a little bit about some of the mods that I've thought about doing but maybe aren't going to, because I think that's like, it's same with like tarot. Like I think that's important too when we talk about things that like maybe I thought about doing but I changed my mind and here's why. So anyway, that's that story with those two decks. Those are deck mods that I'm like probably I'm like, as I'm making this video, I pretty much talked myself out of modding this deck, and in fact this deck is probably just going to go in purgatory because it's not going to do what I originally thought it was going to do. I really don't want to put the time and effort into modding it, so it's probably going to just move along at this point. The dirt gems I'm still on the fence with because I do really like the art. And then yeah, just some of the decks that I did actually end up modding. My Diablo, which is amazing. The Witch is familiar, of course, that whole set. Need to finish modding that whole set. And then I have my little Lilith with just some of the, you know, edgings that I've done. So anyway, that is a look at the recent decks I have modded and a little discussion about some that I'm planning on modding and have changed my mind about modding. So if you are a modder, I would definitely love to know and hear about your experiences, so always feel free to share with me in the comments below. If you are interested in finding out more about my modding process, I will leave the link to those playlists below for you as well. As per usual, you'll find links for everything I can link in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.